And I can send you over to live now if you're ready.
Actually, give me just a second.
Okay.
I want to share let me share my screen first.
Okay.
Okay, you seen the picture of me out the window in the spacesuit?
I am.
Perfect. All right, ready to go when you are.
Okay, here we go. Okay, everybody, we are just a minute or two from starting and appreciate everybody's patience. But I think you're going to find this really fascinating and a lot of fun. I was able to see Garrett present back at Penn quite a while ago, would have been a decade or so ago, fairly recently after he came off the missions in the spacewalk. And it was just a fascinating presentation. And I had been thinking of inviting Garrett in as part of our Penn Wrestling alum speaker series to talk with the team. And we've been getting about once a month an alum will come in and just to talk with the team, talk about, their background in wrestling, what that has meant to them in their career, and kind of their reflections back on the value of the sport, their development, personally, professionally. And, when this pandemic hit us all and we're all at home, I happened to be reading an article about another NASA astronaut who was giving advice on working remotely. I want to talk about working remotely, right? How about the International Space Station? And I thought I know a guy. So I reached out to Garrett, and he was great, quick response, and willing to get on with us tonight. And so, then my thinking kind of expanded from, hey, in addition to sharing with, the guys on the team, let's open this up to our alumni, family, and friends, and, kind of share the content expert that we have, within our community here. So this is great. I'm really excited and, happy to introduce Garrett here. First of all, big welcome to all Penn wrestlers and alumni, family and friends, joining us here tonight. Garrett's a professor of astronautical engineering at the University of Southern California and a senior advisor at SpaceX. So welcome to Garrett. A little about his background. He was born in Morristown, New Jersey, in 1986 graduate of Parsippany High School, and a 1991 graduate of the Management and Technology program at Penn. For those of you who aren't familiar with the M&T program, it was actually founded by a Penn wrestling captain, Bill Hamilton. And Bill went on to be the first director of the M&T program, and I believe was a direct advisor of Garrett's. So another Penn wrestler kind of leading this dual degree program combining Wharton and engineering. So in 1991, Garrett graduated. I'm told as an undergrad, and he can comment on this, but I'm told as an undergrad, he would go up to the rooftop of the high rises, at dawn to be able to catch rockets launching NASA operations. He can tell me if that's true or not. Maybe that's just campus rumor, but I heard that that's true. Garrett went on and received his masterate and doctorate degrees in mechanical engineering from Caltech in 1992 and 1997. So it should be Dr. Reisman, right? And in 2003. And I wasn't aware of this. I was just reading his bio earlier this afternoon, but Garrett served as an aquanaut. So underwater laboratory, living and working for 14 days underwater. And what Garrett's gonna speak to us tonight is the isolation strategies he learned in space, I guess in underwater as well, during his time, and then answer some questions from the audience at the end. He was selected by NASA as a mission specialist astronaut in 1998. His first mission was aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour, and that dropped him off for a 95-day mission aboard the International Space Station. He then returned to Earth in the Space Shuttle Discovery. His second mission was aboard Space Shuttle Atlantis, which returned him to space station. During these missions, Garrett performed 3 spacewalks, operating the space station robot arm, and was a flight engineer aboard the Space Shuttle. So enough from me, and over to Garrett. Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we look forward to hearing your insights.
Thanks, Roger. That was a great introduction, and it's really nice to be connected once again remotely here with Penn Wrestling. So first of all, before I begin, let me just make sure that we get the technology working. Hopefully everybody can see on their screens right now a slide that has me in my spacesuit out the window of the space shuttle, and hopefully you can also see me picture in picture in the corner. So if that's not true, please comment in the Q&A, and Roger can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down and let me know how we're doing. But I'll just proceed assuming that everything's working great. That's generally what we do, like at NASA. So anyway, so actually that story you told about the high rise is a true story. It was in my 5th year at Penn that I kind of realized that maybe becoming an astronaut could possibly be in the realm of possibility. I always thought it was all test pilots, and I got a mom that was scared of flying. Like, and I'm not talking about flying like in a F-16 or something. My mom was scared to get on United, So the thought of like me growing up becoming a test pilot was not going to happen. So I thought being an astronaut was not going to happen. But in my latter years at Penn, I saw some bios of some of the astronauts that NASA had just selected, and they weren't all test pilots. They were engineers, physicians in there, all kinds of other people with other backgrounds. And that was when I kind of realized, hey, maybe this would be possible. And it was in that 5th year that I got excited about it. And so I found out that you can actually see the space shuttle fly over Philadelphia if you're at the right place at the right time. And I told my girlfriend at the time that hey, we can see the space shuttle, and she was trying to be really supportive. I don't think she was really too into this whole NASA thing, but she was trying to be supportive. So we went up to the rooftop lounge on the high rises, and we waited, and at the right time, sure enough, there it was. And I said, hey, look, there's a shuttle, there it is. And she looks out the window, and and we're staring at it, and I'm watching it go by, and I'm seeing it go up. It only takes about 5 minutes to do a full pass. So I'm watching it go over, and then it was gone. And I looked at her, and I realized that she was still looking at the same spot. She never saw the shuttle. She was staring at some star the whole time. But I didn't have the heart to tell her, So I put my arm around her, and the two of us just stared at the star for like another 10 minutes. And I'm like, okay, you had enough? And she's like, yeah. And we left. And to this day, she doesn't know that she never saw the space shuttle, but she was really nice. So a little bit about wrestling. Now, certainly I got a lot out of the sport that helped me along the way, and that's a whole nother presentation, but I'll just touch upon it briefly. Certainly, as far as the instilling a work ethic, a sense of leadership and followership, teamwork, a lot of things I'm going to be talking about later today, I really first learned from wrestling, starting from an early age and going through high school, and then also at Penn, and of course physical fitness and the body control actually that you and the ability, the sense of balance and all that athleticism was actually really key to doing spacewalks. Most of being an astronaut is cerebral when you're piloting the space shuttle or performing an experiment on the space station. But spacewalking is a highly physical activity. And it's much more like athletics than it is like flying an airplane or doing something mental. You still have to concentrate, and it still requires a lot of focus. But so does athletics. So really, all that experience paid dividends much later on. Now, I actually started wrestling at Penn the same year. Roger, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was the same year you became head coach, right? Back in
That's right.
80, the first part of 86, 87. So, and my career, I have to admit right off the bat that my career as a Penn wrestler was not very long or distinguished. In fact, with time off for injury, the time I lost to injury, I think cumulatively I spent maybe a year on the team, and that was about it. I found out at the end of that process that as a collegiate wrestler, I was a really good engineering student. So I can't say that I went on to the Easterns and did great, but I did learn a lot. And actually, looking back now, I realized that cumulative 1 year left me with a lot of really good lessons learned. I got a lot out of that, and I've learned and I've gotten benefit from that time with being on your team, Roger. That to this day, I'm still earning or still paying dividends. About a lot of the topics. Actually, a lot of topics I'll address later today. So I want to thank you for that, and with that, maybe we'll get on with it. So as Roger mentioned, I went up on a couple missions, spent 3 months on the space station. And usually when I give these presentations, people have questions, and the questions are some variation on a single question, which is what was it like? So they asked, what was it like to launch on the space shuttle? What did that feel like? And spoiler alert, it was freaking amazing. It was, like the ultimate adrenaline rush. And I could tell you a lot about that some other time. But what they want to know, what was it like to launch on the shuttle? What was it like to look out and see the Earth from space for the first time? That left a huge impression. Especially when if you look at this picture, by the way, I'll digress for a second and just say, look at that thin blue line that separates the black void of space from the sunlit Earth. And that thin blue line is our atmosphere. And when you see that with your own eyes and you see how thin and fragile it is, that is really impactful, gives you a whole new appreciation for the fragility of our planet. So I could talk all about that. People ask about what was it like to do a spacewalk. Also, unbelievably, mind-blowingly amazing. What was it like to come home and land, and how do you adjust to being back on Earth? And of course, the number one question that all astronauts get all the time is, how do you go to the bathroom? And that is actually the bathroom on the space shuttle. And yeah, but these days, that is not even the number one question anymore, which historically is always the number one question. But right now, these days, the question I get is, what was it like to live in isolation, confined on the space station, separated from Earth, and deal with that kind of situation, which is what everybody's going through right now, and that's all people want to talk about. So let me address those issues. I remember very distinctly when I first went up in 2008 to the space station on Endeavour, and my job was to stay behind. So at the end of the dock time frame, when the joint crews of the space station and Endeavour were working together with the hatches open, it was time for my crewmates on Endeavour to go home. And they went across the hatch into the space shuttle. They closed that hatch, and I closed my hatch on the space station side. And suddenly, all these people that I was very, very close with, who I had trained with for over a year, were now on the other side of a locked hatch. And I turned around and I saw Yuri and Peggy, and they were going to be my crewmates for the foreseeable future. And I remember having a very sharp feeling at that moment, or a thought that occurred to me, which was, I sure hope I like these two people, because I'm not going to see any other humans, or at least have any direct interaction with any other humans for a while. And now, fortunately, Peggy and Yuri were fantastic. And I was really lucky. I flew in space with over 20 people, and every single one of them I'm still friends with today, and I would love to spend more time with. They were fantastic people. But I got lucky because that doesn't happen all the time. So I'm sure that a lot of you now in your self-quarantine probably I could tell you a couple tips that I picked up that maybe will help you, as it did help me get ready to deal with isolation and confinement. Now, we had the benefit of preparing. So I knew that I was going to be up on the space station for months, about 4 years before I actually went. But that gave me plenty of time to prepare and train. And we did give a lot of thought to what the best way to get ready to be in isolation and confinement. Now, those of us that are in quarantine right now did not have that benefit. But I do think that actually all of you that were part of Penn Wrestling are prepared, whether you know it or not. Because I think a lot of things I'm about to talk to you about, you're going to be nodding your heads like, yeah, Yeah, I picked that up along the way, and yeah, that's part of being a good team member on the wrestling team. So a lot of the stuff is really transferable. So hopefully you're all doing great. But let me give you my tips anyway, and hopefully some of this will be helpful for you. So one of the things we did to get ready to be in isolation for on an expedition in space was study expeditions of the past that we could draw analogs to. And one of the best analogs were Arctic exploration that occurred back in the early 20th century. So we had, expeditions to the North Pole and the South Pole and other explorers that went on these very long voyages where you had a crew aboard a ship and they maybe did not see another human being for very, very long periods of time. So one of the most successful, unsuccessful exploratory missions of that era was Shackleton's voyage down to Antarctica. So these pictures you see here are the crew of Endurance. So in 1915, Shackleton set off with his ship, the Endurance, and his crew. And the objective was to get to the South Pole and actually traverse Antarctica to the south, passing by the South Pole, and then sailing to and from Antarctica on his ship. It didn't work out. He actually never reached Antarctica. They got stuck in the ice before they could make landfall. And as you see in that picture there on the left, their ship, the Endurance, was trapped. And they were stuck there, and they had to winter over and hope that they could get the ship free once the ice melted. So they were stuck there for a long, long time. And they had nowhere to go, and they weren't in any communication with the outside world. So one of the things that when we looked at what made this successful, because by the way, I mentioned it was the most successful, unsuccessful mission of all time, maybe. And that is because although they never reached the South Pole, and you could say it was an unsuccessful mission, the amazing thing was that every single crew member got home alive. And when you think about the adversity that they had to suffer and what they were up against, that is a highly improbable outcome and a wonderful surprise. That's why I call it the most successful, unsuccessful. So we asked, well, what did Shackleton do as a leader that kept this crew functioning throughout this very, very difficult period? And one of the things he did very well was he kept the crew busy. So that's tip number one, stay busy. Now, you can see that picture there where they were keeping the ship shape. So he didn't once they were stuck in the ice, they weren't going anywhere. But he still had them scrub the floors. And he still had them do all the things that you would do in a highly cohesive functioning unit at sea. So so the same thing goes for you right now. I mean, it's easy for all of us in confinement, especially if you have these tendencies anyway, which I do, to like not make your bed in the morning, right? Leave your clothes on the floor. Don't leave a bunch of dirty dishes in the sink, right? And just let the place go to pot, okay? But he would not allow the crew to do that. He made sure that they kept scrubbing those floors and kept the place ship shape because it kept up that sense of purpose and that sense of morale and a sense of some accomplishment. So you could do the same thing, make the bed, clean the dishes, take care of and also stay fit. You see down there, they actually played soccer on the ice down there in Antarctica when they could, when the weather permitted. They did several things to stay physically fit, and I hope that all of you are keeping up your workouts the best you can, given the situation we're in. Even if you can't get out to the gym, hope what we're doing here. I got my whole family doing high intensity interval training. And I have to admit, that definition gets stretched quite a bit when you're talking about a 2-year-old. My daughter, she has her own definition of high intensity, but we're doing our best. And every day we have, a 15-minute workout that we do as a family. So I hope you're, and for those of you that are still in competitive, athletics, I hope you're doing everything you can to stay at the peak of fitness. That is very important. So stay busy, keep up your physical fitness, and it's important to not just do busy work. I mean, you can say, "Yeah, I'm staying busy. I finished Netflix," and it's okay to relax and entertain yourself and don't feel, especially if you're feeling a lot of anxiety and stress. It's okay to have some escape for a little while. But I think it's better for all of you because all of you, if you're Penn wrestlers, okay, you're all Type A people like I am. Okay, so you are probably not going to be content with just sitting back and watching TV for a couple of months. So maybe you, I don't know, but typically, if you're a Type A kind of person, staying busy, doing something that is productive will get you a lot more psychological benefit. Okay, so you see Shackleton's crew down there, while they were stuck in the ice on Endurance, they continued to do scientific experiments that they had planned to do once they got to Antarctica. They did it right there on the ship. They continued to study and read and better themselves. So they were doing stuff that at the end of the day, they can go to sleep and say, you know, I did something today that was productive and I feel good about using my time well. Same thing on the space station. If you look right there, that picture of me doing the experiments in a box, they kept us very busy on the space station doing stuff that was either advancing science or building the space station, doing something that at the end of the day, you could feel satisfied and be proud of your work. Number two has to do with what we call expeditionary behavior. And we trained with the National Outdoor Leadership School to prepare for long duration spaceflight. So NASA partnered with Knowles and we did these expeditions. And I understand that actually Penn Wrestling has started to do this too, right, Roger? You told me before that you're starting to incorporate this into part of your off-season training, I think. And that's fantastic. I mean, because I'll tell you, the lessons we learned from Knowles were probably the most applicable thing to living long duration on the space station. And in retrospect, the most applicable training you could do to prepare for what we're all in right now, which is self-quarantine. So hats off to you guys for doing this. And so for some of you, this might be review, but for the alumni, maybe you didn't have the benefit of going on one of these trips. So let me explain. What we do in Knowles is we go out and we do these like 2-week expeditions into the wilderness, where we're completely cut off from the rest of the world. We carried a backup aviation transceiver for emergencies, but otherwise we weren't even checking in on the radio. So we went off and we did this in the Canyonlands in Utah, and you see my group there. Those are 5 other astronauts that came with me. We had 2 instructors, and we all set off on this expedition through the Canyonlands, carrying these big packs and learning how to live off the land for a couple of weeks. And it was we did learn a lot of survival skills along the way, but that's really not what it was about. The whole point of this exercise was to learn expeditionary behavior, which is a term that they use to describe how to interact to make a team work well together for long periods of time, to maximize over the long haul the functioning of a group. And they broke it down into 5 key skills that they taught us: communication, leadership, followership, self-care, team care, and group living. And so what we would do is every day we would have somebody else, and one of the other team members was designated the leader for the day. And that leader was responsible for accomplishing the missions, whatever our objectives were for the day, and for taking care of the group. And then at the end of the day, we would have a debrief, and we'd all sit down, have a big discussion around the campfire, and see what we can get. What did we do well? Where can we improve? And talk about varying different topics. And maybe one day we would talk just about leadership, and then another day around the fire we would talk just about team care. We would go through all these different topics and try to learn as much as we could. So let me try to define what these things are. Now, I'll admit that a lot of this stuff is stuff that we all should have learned in like kindergarten, right? A lot of it is about just how to play nicely with others. But it really becomes so much more important, and it all becomes amplified when you're stuck in isolation and confinement that we all are right now with whoever you're in quarantine with. So it definitely bears repeat if you've read this. So the first skill is communication. You need to communicate openly, honestly. Okay, don't keep stuff to yourself and let it bottle up. If somebody else in your quarantine is doing something that is annoying you, don't just try to ignore it or try to just suppress it. Tell them. Okay. Now be diplomatic, be polite. Okay. Be kind, but don't keep it to yourself, and just don't keep it in there until it bubbles up and all of a sudden it's like, stop it, and you lose your cool, because then you've lost if you get to that point. Don't let it get to that point. Communicate, be honest, be open, but be respectful and be considerate as you do so. It's also, communication, remember, is a 2-way street, right? So it's not just about communicating what you're thinking. It's also about listening and being open to hear what the other person is thinking. And a lot of times, maybe they are keeping something bottled up inside of them, but they're giving you little kind of passive-aggressive cues about something. Look for those cues, right? Listen carefully. understand what they're saying, and do your best to hear, even if they're not saying it, hear what's bothering you. Okay, and it's also important to admit when you're wrong. A really good, confident leader, or any really good, confident team member, should be comfortable just saying, you know what, now I was wrong. And that's especially when you're a leader, that can be hard to do, but it's important. That's communication. Leadership is really interesting for me being a civilian. When I first observed some of the military guys in our group take their turn as leader for the day, and what I found was how much the military instills in them the concept of leading by example. They would be the first one up in the morning. They would be the one that worked hardest throughout the whole day. They'd be the last one to sleep, and they were super prepared. This is another really important characteristic of being a leader. You can hope for the best, and you can be positive, and you should be positive. And a cheerleader, you should encourage everybody that to do the best, and that today is going to be a good day. But at the same time, you have to be prepared for the worst. Okay, it's not so it's inexcusable for a leader to just hope everything works out. You have to plan for things that go completely pear-shaped. So the military leaders in our group, whatever the day objective was, they had a nominal plan, and they were positive about the likelihood of us accomplishing that plan and executing it. But they also had a plan B and a plan C and a plan D that were extremely well thought through. So when things didn't go as expected, they immediately knew what to do. They had a plan. That's also a hallmark of really good leadership. So another thing that really good leaders do that can be hard to do is soliciting dissenting opinions. Okay, so making sure that as a leader, it's hard to encourage people to tell you that you're wrong. Okay, none of us, any of us that have even the smallest smidge of ego, have a hard time with that, and that's understandable. But it's really important that your followers feel empowered to speak up when things aren't going. So I'll give you an example. One day I was a leader, and we had to go navigate using a topo map and a compass and try to reach a certain go from point A to point B, where we could be confident or reasonably confident that we would find water. We were running low, and that's a dangerous thing out in the desert. Okay, so it was really important that we were going in the correct direction to find this canyon where we thought deep down in this canyon we could find some water. And so I looked at the map, and in the morning I was leading by example. I got up early, and I studied the map, and I said, okay, I think that mountain that we see, that one right there, I think that's the one that is this mountain on this map, and I think that's where we're going to find water. So now I told my whole team that your job for the rest of this entire day is to prove to me that that mountain that we're looking at is not the mountain on the map. Prove to me that I'm wrong, because it's really important that we're heading in the right direction. It turned out that it was the right mountain, and we found the water. It had a happy ending. But the important thing was that everybody felt okay with saying, "Are you sure it's not this one?" And hey, maybe this is inconsistent. And they felt okay with investigating my decision, making sure it was right. Verifying. So the other thing, as far as what I was saying before about planning ahead, and another example is right now, as you're in quarantine, are you planning ahead? Are you just hoping for the best, or do you have a backup plan? Do you have a plan B and C? So if somebody in your self quarantine right now comes down with COVID and is having really bad symptoms, do you know what you're going to do? Do you know where you're going to, if you're going to need to take them somewhere? First of all, do you know how you're going to treat them in the house? And if that becomes untenable, do you know where you're going to go? Are you ready? Do you have gas in the car? Do you have a go bag full of anything you might need, like a cell phone and a cell phone charger, maybe some food or whatever else you might need to take with you? Change of underwear. Are you ready to go? Have you really thought through that backup plan? That's an example of something that is one of these lessons that you can apply right now. So the next topic here is followership, which goes obviously hand in hand with leadership, and really good followership is really important. And it's something we don't really talk about enough. A lot of times we kind of gloss over because everybody focuses on leadership training and everybody wants to be the leader. But the truth is, in almost any organization, there's a lot more followers than there are leaders. And being a good follower is really, really important. Um, so one thing about being a good follower is that you need to be supportive of the leader. Okay, you can't be stabbing them in the back or undermining them. That is toxic to the functioning of a good group. But at the same time, you have to be willing to speak up and speak truth to the leader if things are not going well. Right, you have to be willing to do that. And when there's an art to this. And working for Elon Musk, I could tell you that you have to be very careful about how you do this. But you do want to be respectful, you want to be tactful, you want to be very diplomatic about it. But you can't keep information to yourself. That's important, okay? Because then that's when everything goes wrong. There's lots of aviation accident investigations that have to do with a co-pilot who knew better and who knew that they were going to die, but just never could get themselves to actually tell the captain that he was wrong. So you have to be willing to do that when it really matters. So the other thing about leadership and followership in that dynamic, first of all, for it to function well, you need mutual trust, and you need mutual respect. Okay, you have to trust the leaders, have to trust the followers, and vice versa, and you have to respect one another in order for this to really work well. And that really is the foundation for which all these other behaviors rest. Okay. The other thing is the leaders, you have to be flexible, especially when it comes to an expedition or a long period of confinement like we're all in right now. And what I mean by that is that when you're picking what movie to watch tonight on Netflix, that should be probably a pretty democratic process, okay, in your quarantine in your household right now. But if there's an emergency, if somebody gets really sick and it's time to go to the hospital, then it's time that the leader of the group has to be more directive and say, you know what, we're getting in the car right now, grab the go bag, it's time. There's no more time to take a vote. And you need a more kind of hierarchical, more like how a military organization functions. And we studied that too, because on the space station, on the space shuttle, we can have that kind of chain of command, very strict hierarchical organization, and it could work for a week or two. But if you're talking about months, that's not going to work. So you need to be flexible and be democratic when it's called for, and be directive when it's called for. The next topic here is self-care. So this is all about being aware of your own state and taking care of yourself. And sometimes that's easy to not do or not do well. And for good reason. So let's think about, like, on this group, you can have somebody who says, you know what, my feet are starting to hurt a little bit, but I'm gonna take one for the team. I'm gonna continue to carry all this weight in my pack, and I'm gonna keep charging along. I'm just gonna ignore it. But after a day or two, you end up, one of the biggest problems we had physically with this expedition was we were carrying, I think, 70-pound packs, maybe 80, and going and covering a large distance every day. And we weren't used to doing that. We weren't accustomed to it, and we're getting blisters on our feet. So you can say, I'm going to be a hero, and I'm going to take all this extra weight, and I'm going to just ignore the fact that my feet are hurting. And then all of a sudden, you got these massive blisters on your feet, and you can't move. And then we got to take time out. We got to provide medical attention to that team member. And then once we can get them back on their feet, we have to nurse them back to health and go very, very slowly. So in a well-intentioned attempt to help the team, they end up really hurting the team. So being aware of your own capabilities and being aware of your own situation is really important. Taking care of yourself so that you don't become a burden to the team is super important in any expedition. The other part of this is being honest about your own limitations. As a leader, the hardest thing I had to do as a leader was convince one of my teammates to take weight out of their pack. Okay, everybody wanted to pull their own weight, literally. Everybody wanted to have, just as much as anybody else was carrying. But we had to admit that we were all of varying different levels of capability. We had some really strong, very athletic people, and then some people that weren't quite so strong and athletic. And convincing them that it was in the best interest of the team to let those stronger individuals carry more. It was very, very difficult because nobody wanted to be seen as the weak link or less than capable than everybody else. but that was the most efficient way for the group to function. And so you have to acknowledge your own limitations and just be honest about it. That's the best thing you can do for the team. So you want to make sure you get adequate rest and just take care of yourself. And that's all self-care. The next topic is team care, which is similar, but that's really just about being considerate and being very aware of the mental state, physical state of your teammates, and helping out whenever you can. So you want to monitor your team for any signs of stress or fatigue. You want to encourage everybody to participate. If you see somebody that's kind of getting a little bummed out, maybe they had to take weight out of the pack and they're feeling like they're letting the team down, well, go over and give them a pat on the back and go out of your way to include them in all the team activities. One of the best things you can do to foster good team care is do the unpleasant tasks. Don't just jump in and do all the fun stuff, like lighting the fire in the morning. We were all pyromaniacs. We all wanted to do that. Don't just say, oh, look, I'm a great teammate. I helped out. I lit the fire. Like, yeah, the other 5 people really wanted to do it too. So really, the way you can really help out the team is do the unpleasant tasks. Do the things that nobody else wants to do. If you're home right now and there's a pile of dirty laundry or a pile of dirty dishes, well, clean that up without being asked. Just go do it, and I guarantee you, the others in your quarantine will really appreciate that. Let's see. So you do want to offer and accept help. That's another hallmark of good team care. That was another thing that was very difficult to do. If you look at that picture down there with the heavy packs and we're holding hands trying to get over these rocks, a lot of times you would hold out your hand to your teammate and say, hey, let me give you a hand. And they would say, no, it's okay. I got this. I can do this all by myself, which is great, and that's a very typical type A personality kind of character trait. And I understand that, and it's laudable to try to do everything yourself, but it's not the most effective way for the team to function. So one of the things I noticed was our 2 instructors, who are animals. Okay, these guys were just like so physically fit and so comfortable in this environment. They could carry everything and go forever. Probably didn't even need to sleep. Our instructors, and their names are Andy and Molly. I'm still friends with them to this day. We still hang out. They're wonderful people. But here's what I noticed, that whenever we were going over some terrain like this and you offered them a hand, they would always take it. They would say, thank you. And they would take your hand and you would help them. And I pointed that out to everybody. It's like, look, our most capable teammates are willing to accept help. Why are you not accept help? It's the smart thing to do. Don't try to be a hero. Finally, on this topic, group living. So you want to be really hyper intensely aware of how you are affecting the other members of your team. Are you doing something that's annoying somebody? Right? Do you like hum maybe without even realizing it as you're walking around the house? As you're sitting there doing your work, do you tap your pencil on the desk? Do you have any of these little idiosyncrasies that under normal times would not even be noticed, but in confinement and isolation, everything gets amplified. So you want to be like super attentive and making sure that you're not doing any of those things. And if you are, stop it as soon as you can. Cooperate with rather than compete with the people that you're in quarantine with. Take accountability. Give praise very, very freely, but accept blame. And above all else, stay calm, especially if there's any kind of conflict. Don't let emotions get the better of you to the best of your abilities. And a big part of that actually comes from self-care. If you're getting adequate rest and getting adequate exercise, you're going to be more likely capable to control your emotions than if you're not performing good self-care. Okay, those are the 5 key skills of expeditionary behavior, which is really the meat of this presentation. And I have to give a tip of the hat to Knowles for really teaching us all this. It's great training. Next topic, if I can get my slides to advance. Yeah, it's personal space. So it's also important when you're in isolation and confinement to have a place that you're in. On the space station, that was our sleep station. So you see me there in my sleep station. If you see the open door on the left, see some books I was reading at the time, some photos of friends and family, some of my favorite snacks. Anyway, this was my personal space. Every other part of the space station was communal and shared amongst all the other crewmates. The galley, the workout area, everything was all shared. But this was my space, and if I needed some time alone or just at the end of the day, I can go in there, close the door, and I have my own little home. And it's really important that all of us have that capability. It doesn't have to be a physical space. You might not be fortunate enough to have your own room or a part of the house that you can say, you know, this is mine. I can close the door and have my time when I need it. It might be a temporal thing. Like, for example, actually, there's no part of this house I'm in right now that is safe for my children, that they don't transgress. But once they're asleep, okay, I go into the living room and that's my time, right? Then before I go to bed, I can watch, you know, an hour or so of television and catch up on some of those series I always wanted to watch on the streaming services. So it's not, the living room is not mine all the time, but after the kids are asleep, then it's mine. Okay, so that you might have some personal space that's yours at a particular point of time, and that's okay. The point is that you got to carve out a little bit of time for yourself in the midst of all this communal living, and everybody has to be respectful of your teammates' need for personal space and personal time. Okay, last tip is a basic one is staying in touch. On the space station, we used something very similar to what we're doing right now. It wasn't Zoom or Skype. It was another piece of software, but basically a video teleconferencing using a webcam and a laptop. And that's the main way that I stayed in close touch with my family and friends while I was up on the space station. Now, of course, we're all doing it. It's great. Actually, I've had nice little reunions with people I haven't seen in decades, including my fraternity brothers at Penn that I've been reconnecting with, and a ton of other people. So in some ways, I'm actually more closely connected while I'm isolated with some people in my life than I was beforehand, and that's great. I mean, this is a really powerful psychological tool if you use it well, and I encourage you all to do that. Okay, I just want to kind of wrap up this part and end on a kind of a high note, which is talking a little bit about going back to spaceflight. 2020, there's no question about it, is going to be remembered forever as the year of the coronavirus pandemic, okay? Which is not a very uplifting, exciting thing. But there's no way around it. But I do believe that 2020 will also be remembered over the long haul, you know, a century from now, as the year that we started a golden new age of spaceflight. Because what's happening right now is revolutionary. You know, when I was at NASA, we were going up to the space station, we were flying the space shuttles. But what we're about to do is going to be a whole nother level. What's happening is a couple very high net worth individuals are putting their money, their time, and their companies behind the efforts to expand human spaceflight. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos with Blue Origin, Elon with SpaceX, and then Richard Branson with Virgin Galactic. And what's happening this year is right at the same time, pretty much, all of those companies and Boeing are getting ready to launch new vehicles carrying people into space. So on the left of this picture is the vehicle I was working on at SpaceX, the Crew Dragon. The middle picture is Boeing Starliner, and then we have Virgin Galactic space plane, Spaceship Two, and then we have Blue Origin's new Shepard vehicle down there in the bottom right. So this year, in fact, I believe it's going to happen as soon as next month. SpaceX is going to be the first one to launch people on their vehicle into orbit. So two old friends of mine, Bob Benkin and Doug Hurley, next month are going to strap into this vehicle and fly up to the space station. And then Boeing will be doing their vehicle and their test flights with their first crew, hopefully also in 2020, maybe into 2021, but soon. And Virgin Galactic has already done test flights with their test pilots, but this year both Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin could potentially also in 2020 carry fare-paying passengers, people that bought tickets to go and really start space tourism on suborbital flights, going up and coming straight down, but getting up there to see the curvature of the Earth and experiencing weightlessness. This is really going to change everything because we have 4 new vehicles, and this is just the beginning. What's on the drawing board is really incredible. This is just the first step. But it's an important first step because ever since we landed the last space shuttle back in 2011, so about 9 years ago, we no longer as a country have the ability to take men and women into space. We have to ask our good friends, the Russians, to help us out with that. And that's not a good place for us to be. That's not where this country should be. But this year in 2020, we're going to be launching Americans once again, and American vehicles leaving from American soil. And I'm very excited about that because that's where we should be. We're going to be back in business, and it's going to be better than ever. Now, it's going to happen this year. The reason I'm confident is we've already flown the vehicle. We took this Crew Dragon all the way up to the space station and brought it back with nobody inside. We did it totally robotically as a test flight, but it worked quite well. And the very next step is to take people. So I think I'll wrap up there. Just saying that, hey, what's going to happen this year in 2020 is the start of something great. You're going to see this really progress incredibly well. What you're going to see over the next decade is going to be the kind of pace of technological change that we enjoyed during the Apollo program a generation ago. So stay tuned. I think what you're going to see happening in the next decade is going to blow you away. So with that, Roger, I'd be happy to take questions.
Awesome, Garrett. Thanks so much. It was really compelling, and we do have some questions that have come in. So one of the questions is, what kind of contingencies, you talked about contingencies in Plan B, Plan C, Plan D from a leadership perspective. So the question is, what kind of contingencies did you and your team prepare for on the space station?
Well, the biggest contingency we prepared for were one of the three big emergency events. So the things you worry about the most when you're up on the space station is either a fire, a rapid decompression, so you'd spring a leak, or some kind of toxic atmosphere. So there's a lot of things. Actually, the most likely way to get a toxic atmosphere inside the vehicle is when you have a fire and you have all those products of combustion that can basically you can asphyxiate on. But you can also get it from other chemicals, and we have one of the most likely ways was in the cooling systems. We actually have a lot of liquid ammonia, and that stuff, even at small concentrations, can be really deadly. And so we always were concerned about, well, what if that somehow gets into the cabin? So we trained over and over to respond extremely quickly and in a very practiced manner if one of those events should occur. And we had some great training and preparation. Fortunately, none of that happened while I was up there, but we continued to train for it while I was there. But then there were a bunch of lesser, a ton of kind of lesser emergencies we were prepared for, including having to medevac somebody. If somebody came down with a life-threatening illness of some sort, we had the ability to do some rudimentary treatments. We had what's it called? EED, the thing, the paddles where we can try to help somebody who's having a heart attack. We had the ability to intubate people and give them all kinds of medications, but you're limited by what you can do. And if you had to, you could also get into the Soyuz spacecraft and come home within about 24 hours, and get them to a hospital with some professional medical care. Because you don't want like a Penn wrestler giving you a chest tube if you can have a real doctor do it. So, we train for all that stuff.
Yeah. Great, thanks. And here's another question. I guess this has to do with International Space Station and who was on the team, where they were from. How many languages do you speak?
That's a good question. Очень интересный вопрос. So Russian, we had to learn Russian, and that's really it. The original agreement for the International Space Station was that everything was going to be done in English, and even the Russians signed up for that. Even the Canadians got okay with that, which was really very impressive. So everything, when we went to Japan to train on the Japanese laboratory module, all of the labels, all of the instruction manuals, everything was in English, and all of the classes we had were in English. And same thing was true in Europe and in Canada and everywhere else we went, except for Russia. Now, to be fair, the Russians never lived up to their agreement, so they kept everything in Russian. To be fair, they had a much bigger program than like the Canadians or the Japanese. So they had a lot of people that would have to learn how to speak English. And they had been doing this for a very long time. I mean, some of my instructors over there in Moscow were like the same guys that taught Yuri Gagarin. It's like they've been there forever. So teaching all these old guys that speak English was a Herculean task. it was much easier just to teach a couple astronauts to speak Russian. So that's what they did. And I actually went on an immersion program, and I lived with a family in Moscow. And that was intellectually probably the hardest thing I had to do was learning how to speak Russian.
Yeah. Great. So a couple questions here around exercising in space, right? And you mentioned several times about fitness. So one is how long you kind of in your schedule for your day. So you were 95 days at the space station. So in your schedule for the day, how much time was allotted to exercise, and then what kind of exercise did you guys do?
So exercise is extremely important on the space station. Not so much for like being fit to do a spacewalk or anything, although it certainly was important for that. But the most important reason to continue to work out was because if you don't, you start losing bone and muscle mass, especially in your legs. Because once you're up in space, you're no longer going upstairs. You're not even walking, right? It's kind of like in Wall-E, where you end up like slipping on your big gulp in some like floating armchair or something, right? Because you're no longer using any of those muscles, and they begin to deteriorate. So if you don't use them, just like somebody on a really long bed rest, you start to get atrophy in your muscles. You're still using your arms because that's how you move around, and that's how you do everything up in space. But your legs are pretty much useless. They're just along for the ride, and they start wasting away. And your bone does too. Your whole skeleton begins to decalcify. And at the time I was there, even with our best countermeasures, I was still losing about 1% of my bone density every month I was up there. I came home and I was about 3% low when he took a full body X-ray. So that was a little disconcerting. The best way we have to alter that or fight that is simply working out. So they scheduled us 2 hours a day every day. Now, we didn't actually do 2 hours worth of exercise. We probably did about half of that because we had to, get changed. There's prep and post time in that 2 hours, get the equipment set up, and then finally work out. But we still had to do that every single day, and that was really key. The most important type of exercise for the bone and muscle loss countermeasure was resistive exercise. Now, I'm not talking about free weights, right? Because you wouldn't believe how much I could bench press up there. I could bench press a whole space station. It's awesome in microgravity. But what we did was it was essentially all through resistance. So when I was there, we had a machine that we could, by connecting ropes and pulleys to cylinders that were full of rotary, like helical elastics. So when you pull on the cord, these rubber material would stretch, and by that would provide the resistance. And by connecting the pulleys and the ropes in different ways with other equipment, you could do like deadlifts, you can do squats, you can do single leg squats, you could do bench press, you can do all the same kind of resistance training that we would do in the gym. What we found out, and that was the most important, we also had a treadmill. And the way that would work is you put on a harness, and then you have bungee cords that hold your waist down to the floor. And with that bungee cord, you can run on a treadmill. I never really liked that very much, to be honest with you. Some people did. It didn't feel right. It didn't really feel like normal running, and you could feel kind of your internal organs bouncing up and down, and that was not very pleasant to me. And so I never really particularly enjoyed running up there. Some people did like run. If you can run, it takes an hour and a half to go all the way around the Earth. So if you can run for an hour and a half, you can brag when you get home that you ran around the world. Okay. I never did that, but I did once ride the stationary bike across the Pacific Ocean, so I got that going. But the stationary bike is easy. It's just like a regular stationary bike, except that you have to clip into the pedals. So we have normal bike racing shoes that we just clip on, just like you would with a racing bike. And then once you're clipped in, the only thing that's really different about it is you don't need a seat. You can just basically stand up and pedal. And that feels fine because you don't feel the need to sit down. And we had a nice window there, so I can watch the whole Pacific Ocean go by. And I knew I was halfway there when I hit Hawaii. That was nice. But what we have now, by the way, is we have a whole new machine that actually doesn't work with elastics. Instead, it has pneumatic pistons, and by having a small hole in there or an orifice that you can calibrate, as you move the piston and squeeze the air out through that little tiny hole, that provides a much higher level of resistance. So what we found was we were limited with the old machine on how much load we could apply. And what we're doing is we're doing high reps with relatively low load. But what we found out purely by accident was that if you do high load and fewer reps, that is much more effective at maintaining your bone density. So now the astronauts that we're sending up to the space station are coming home with 0 bone loss, and that's great. They're right at baseline when they come home, and we really solved that problem.
Yep. I've got maybe 1 or 2 more questions here, and I think we've got a really good one that relates to what we're all us are experiencing, and what we're reading, which is setting a schedule for yourself in isolation is incredibly important. When there's not as much natural structure through work or school or sport or other things. So the question here is, can you describe a typical day for you and your team on the space station?
Oh, sure. So we were highly regimented on the space station, and we had a schedule, and we had scheduling software. And actually, one of my biggest sources of anxiety when I was up in the space station was trying to keep up with the schedule, because it wasn't easy to do. And if you go on my YouTube page, you'll see a clip in there somewhere where I like start pounding on the laptop, like I can't stop the line from moving, and I was kind of joking about it, but they did, like every 15 minutes there was something that we were supposed to be doing. So we started every day with a daily planning conference where we would go around to each of the different control centers, starting in Moscow and then Houston and then Tokyo and then Cologne, or actually Munich in Germany. And we'd go all around the world, and we would talk to them about, like, what are we doing today? Are there any last minute changes? And give them some data that they couldn't get electronically. We would give them some information. So we would do that planning conference every morning. Then we would have breakfast as a crew, and then we start going about our day. And it was different every day, which was kind of nice that there was some variety. You might be doing some science experiments. You might be doing some maintenance on the space station. If you're really lucky that day, you get to do a spacewalk or operate the robot arm, which is the highlight of your time on the space station. Or you might be preparing for the space shuttle to show up. You might be getting ready for their mission and staging some equipment for them. So there's a lot of different things that we would do in any given day, but we would always get back together for lunch as a crew and back together as a crew for dinner. I would regularly spend whole days without seeing my Russian crewmates, because in general, I would work on the American side, and the Russian guys would work on the Russian side. But we would still get together every day for lunch and dinner. And then there was time for sleep. But there's very little personal time. And so the way we all got personal time is we just stayed up past our bedtime. And so none of us really slept the full 8 hours we're allotted every night, but that's how we had some fun.
All right, so I think we got 2 more questions here to share with you, and just super appreciate your time and this expertise. One is, you talked about that view of Earth from space, and the very thin atmosphere, how fragile the Earth is. From that unique experience where so few people actually see that, right? What sticks with you the most about that vision, about that concept, and about our existence here on Earth?
Yeah, so I'll tell you that, like, honestly, when I first looked out the window for the very first time and I looked down at the planet, I was expecting something really overwhelming, and it never really materialized. I guess I was a bit underwhelmed. I mean, the way it looks, as you look out the window, it's like in a really, really high airplane, and it looks just like the pictures I showed you in my presentation. You kind of all know what to expect. And a lot of astronauts have come back and they said, oh, we get this overview effect where we realize that that we're all part of the same, that we all have the same home, and then you can't see the borders from space. And I was like, really? I mean, what, did you think you were going to look out and see like dotted lines down there, written on the ground and labels, or maybe color coded or something? So that was kind of underwhelming, because I don't think, I personally, I believe that's self-evident that we're all human beings, and all the things that divide us are much less important than the things that make us all the same. And the fact that we all live on this Earth, that should be obvious, right? You shouldn't have to go up to space to see that. But when I did look at the horizon, that's when I had the kind of more of a transformative or impactful moment. Looking at that fragility, like if we look at the picture I have on the screen right now, you can see the sunrise coming up through that very thin layer. You're zoomed in. That's a very, very, highly magnified. There's probably at least a 100 millimeters lens, telephoto lens. So when you see how thin that atmosphere is, and you compare it to the size of the Earth, and if you think about the fact that the ocean at its deepest point is 10 times thinner than what you're looking at right there, um, you realize that all the stuff that's important on the Earth is just part of a very precious surface coating. I mean, the Earth is huge, but it's basically one big dead rock, and it's just a substrate. And it would be no more unique than the moon or Mercury or something if it weren't for the fact that it has this incredibly precious surface coating. But it really is a surface coating. I mean, from the bottom of the ocean to the top of the atmosphere, compared to the diameter of the Earth, it's about the same ratio as like the skin on an apple. And so when you realize that the Earth, suddenly the Earth doesn't seem so big anymore, and it definitely left me with this huge visceral sensation that we've got a very, very fragile home, and that it's perfectly within our capability to screw it up. And that, whenever I can, I try to encourage people to think about that and change what we're doing, because we have been screwing it up for hundreds of years, and it is important that we find ways of doing things cleaner.
Okay, last question here, and I think back to the physical side, you'd mentioned, being a wrestler and the spacewalk and how physically challenging that was. Can you just describe us, what that was like, from a physical standpoint, doing, you did multiple spacewalks, right?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to do 3, which, by the way, it was very unlikely. When I first told them, that, hey, it's okay, I was a wrestler, and I've been doing some scuba diving, some rock climbing, so maybe all those skills would be transferable, make me a good spacewalker. These guys, they literally laughed in my face, saying, like, what are you, 4 foot what? Like, you're too short. You're never, because the conventional wisdom was that you need the physiology of or the shape of a orangutan. That's your ideal body type for a spacewalk. You need like really long arms, compact trunk, and like very stubby legs, because everything is with the arms, and the suit is basically one size fits all. There's some interchangeable components, but the helmet's one size, the backpack is one size. So like you're this little guy, you can get swallowed up in there, you're not gonna be able to do anything. And I was at a big disadvantage. So it took a lot of I had to get a lot of help, and I had to really work hard at it. I eventually earned the highest qualification, and I got to lead one of our most complex spacewalks at the end of my time at NASA. So it all had a very happy ending, and it is a very physical process. It's the training is harder than actually doing it for real up in space, because what we do is we go into we have this enormous pool in Houston. It's like 200 feet long, 100 feet wide, 40 feet deep. We can fit like most of the space station in there, and they put you in the suit. They pick you up with a crane, because you weigh about close to 400 pounds. So they pick you up and they drop you in the water, but you're buoyant because there's a lot of air in that big suit. And then they weigh you out so that you don't bob to the surface or sink to the bottom, and you even stay in the right attitude. They take out any righting moment so that it feels like you're in space, but you're not. And when you're upside down, it hurts, because all your weight's being borne on your shoulders, on the bearings of the suit. And anytime you have to cantilever out one of your tools, it's especially if you're upside down doing that, it's very painful. Puts a lot of unnatural torques on the shoulders, because the suit won't let your shoulders rise up. So you're trying to exert lots of force this way, but your shoulders being held down. Almost everybody ends up getting arthroscopic repairs of their shoulders. I was fortunate enough to avoid that, but almost everybody gets hurt, because you're trying really hard to do your best in that training environment, but it's physically a really tough task. When you get up to space, actually it's easier, because everything just floats, and you don't have to fight the effects of gravity. But it's still really tiring, because it's such valuable, precious time out there, and they're trying to squeeze every bit of productive work out of you that they can, and you're working really hard. And when I came in after the end of that, and all of my spacewalks exceeded 7.5 hours in duration. And so when you come in after 7.5 hours, you are just physically spent. I mean, just some of the best night's sleep I ever got were the 3 nights after my 3 spacewalks. It's hard work.
Right. Awesome. Well, Garrett, thanks so much for sharing with us tonight, and everybody who joined, we really appreciate your participation too, and welcome your feedback. We're thinking about content experts from Penn Wrestling, sharing their expertise in other areas as well. So give us your feedback, let us know your thoughts, and Garrett, stay safe out there, be strong, and thanks so much for being a part of our team.
Thanks, you too. Thanks for inviting me. It was really fun.